While I'm gathering these pieces up, I've just seen the screw for the rewind knob, so I'm going to put that in place. So have a wavy washer, just apply a bit of synthetic grease to that, put it in place over the centre part of my rewind knob, put the other piece together, and there's a screw that runs in and holds that all together. Check that that revolves, that's good, put that to one side. I need this tool to do the other job. So the film advance, the lever sits on there like that. I think that needs a bit more cleaning than I've given that. Let me just give that another wipe. And I can say that because I can see a tinge of green there from that green grease that I was wailing about to start off with. That's okay. So here's our lever. I'm going to put a touch of grease on that catch there. That's the catch that holds the shutter, the film advance lever locked if the frame counter is round at number 1. I've set this mechanism so that the film advance lever sits out at about 90 degrees. I will put a little bit of grease on the frame counter spring and pop that in position. The pin for that goes in the front hole. Let's gather these other pieces up. Now I did experiment with assembling this. I'm going to show you 2 ways to assemble this. I've got that in place, I've got that in place. I'm going to put a bit of grease on this component. Fit this chrome piece over the top. The grease just holds it together, as otherwise these pieces all fall apart and you'll be swearing and cursing. Now that nice knurled chrome ring will have a line scratched across it. That points you towards the number 1 on your dial here. If you put it round the wrong way, you'd have a film advance which handily locks every time you get to frame 21, and you won't enjoy it. Here's a wavy washer. I'm putting some grease on that. That sits down in there. These 3 components sit on the top piece. Lifting this as a one piece, bring it over to the camera. That hole in here has to line up with that pin. Keeping your finger pressure on the top, rotate this clockwise until you hear the ratchet drop in. There's 2 ratchets. Now, that second one just dropped in, and that's the one I was waiting for. We have a star washer that goes in there, and then the screw. You can do that up fairly snug and test to make sure that this rotates smoothly. That appears good. And I'm watching the frame counter and it's counting. Okay, so that's one way to do it. It works reliably, it's simple enough. I was experimenting with a different way. And I think potentially it's simpler. I don't know, I haven't decided yet. Because I'm so familiar with that method, I've been doing it so long, I don't know whether this is better or worse. It's hard to be convinced. Okay, so we're in much the same boat as before. This piece has to go on, line up the notches, and the grease will hold this together. Our frame number disc goes on here and number 1 goes towards that scratched line. We'll put this on that top section. Put our wavy washer in there. Now we've got this spring. See if I can do this right. We want this spring in here around there. That's tucked down in there. The post is sticking up. If we bring the post up through the larger hole, I've got that round the wrong way, let me just swing that round a bit further. We want to be around about there, do we? There's our pin, there's our square hole. If I can line this up, all of a piece, it's all done. Nothing fell apart, that's all good. Have I got this set? Yeah, this is set so that I can put this on at about 90 degrees as before. Put the washer in place. Run down that screw lightly. Rotate this clockwise until you hear that big ratchet drop in. You should be when the frame counter gets near number 1. It's not doing it, it's not dropping in. Oh, let's get this around here. Try that again. That's better. It's because I didn't have this arm out at 90 degrees. Just snug that up. That counter's working nicely. Now it doesn't lock because it requires the top of the camera to be on there to lock. Because that lever drops in against this pin, this post visible here. That's what it locks against. But that's our film advance done. So what about the shutter release? Let's get that in place. So the shutter release components. Oh, a bit of molybdenum paste through the centre there. The stacks there, there's still water in there. And more of that. Let's take a spot of synthetic grease, pop it on the larger of those 2 shafts. Here's a little spacer bush that goes on there. Press that on there. That grease stops that from falling off. Doesn't really serve any other purpose. I'll put a spot of grease on the other shaft. There's a spring goes over that. Our shutter release button has a collar that goes on the top. If you don't put that collar on the top, you'll end up with trouble, because if that's left over at the end of the job, sooner or later your film advance is not going to work properly. Put that shutter release button to one side. This needs to feed down in here and couple to this shaft. In our case, there was a spacer washer on that shaft, and the spacer washer is important because it helps the shutter release press down a little bit further on the shutter release. Otherwise, if you miss that out, you'll end up in a situation where the shutter doesn't release reliably, or it might release on all the speeds but a 500th or something of that nature, because it doesn't depress down far enough. So that's in place. You can probably see the position of that washer. I'll pull you in a bit, you can see it. there is that washer. If it was present to start off with, it's got to go back. It's not present in every camera. Our shutter release button can go on the top. And we can swing the film advance lever and press the shutter release, and everything runs nice and smoothly. So that part's all good. Need to put the door on here, and then I can turn my attention to the rangefinder. Well, there's not much to the door. I'm going to put a touch of grease on here and here. And that helps hold our paper washers, our cartridge paper washers in place. Now if you've lost these, if they were torn up, unfit for further duty or anything of that nature, basically they're just paper. You can cut some more. It's just no fun. So we'll get those in place. Now I want to get the door in place. I'm going to get the bottom pin in the slot at the bottom here, stretch the door up and get the top pin in place. Like that. And now I want my hinge pin screws in position. So we've got 2 hinge pin screws. And I think we had a total of 3 spacer washers. So I'll gather together those pieces. I'm looking to see what washers we've got. We've got a fairly thick one there, a thinner one there, and a really thin one there. Okay. I'm going to put the thick one at the top, and we've got to get that in on top of that hole there where the screw goes through, and line that up and get that screw started. Yes, that's gone in well. Now I've got to be careful not to drop my shutter release out, because otherwise I'll end up losing my washer, that spacer washer. Now at here I've got to peel this back because we want to get the washers and hinge pin at the bottom. You stand this camera on its head. Got my 2 washers and stacking them one on top of each other. And I have to slide them in to that joint. It's quite tight. See if I can pull them into line. Now one of those washers didn't go properly. So I've got the bigger one, the thicker one. Now I've got to be careful not to drop my shutter release. I need to find out what happened to that second washer, or the first washer, the washer that appeared to go in. It looks like it's in position. Yeah, it was. Now I partly closed the front of the camera there to fold that back just so I've got a bit more working space. I want these 2 washers in together at the same time. without dropping my shutter release out, I've got to get the two washers, the door and everything else lined up all at the same time. That's not the right screw. I was busy trying to put the wrong screw in there. That's in place. Yeah, my shutter release fell out. I'm hoping I didn't lose my washer. No, it's stuck on the release. Got to get that guided back into place. Done. So our door's back in position. I'll close that. We'll come back and deal with that shortly. Okay, so this is like a time bomb at the moment. If I let the shutter release fall out, we're going to be in trouble. I'm going to put that surround for the tripod socket back in place. I'm going to come back and glue my Leatherettes leather back in place shortly, but not yet. Once I've got the top of the camera in place. Okay, so our film advance is in place, our shutter release is in place, its washers and so forth is in place. That moves nice and smoothly. That's good. I can put that to one side. I need to turn my attention now to the rangefinder, because the rangefinder needs to be serviced. And here it is. This one's problem is it just oozes back to the rest position at its own pace, which isn't a very good pace. This is going to have to come apart. I'll stretch this pin back to stretch the spring out. Lift that pin out of the way. Using a large screwdriver, it's a good fit for this screw. I'll get it into that screw and I'm going to hopefully loosen it. That screw is usually tight. That one didn't disappoint. Here's the screw. Here's the plain washer. Here's the wavy washer. The arm also has a bush through it. Now I'm going to scribe a line on that bush lightly so that it goes back in the same relative position. It's circular, but with a slot in it, it's going to act a bit like an eccentric. I'll scribe a line across there and there. Now I can tell which way up it goes and where it was positioned. The rangefinder body itself, we've got a prism at the end that needs to come out. The prism's held in and adjusted with two little grub screws. These are our vertical alignment. Bring the prism out. Now that surface is painted and it's probably even silvered under there. On a 3C that's not painted, it's just glass and they rely on total internal reflection. There's a mask here on the front. That's got to come off because I'm going to clean this in an ultrasonic cleaner. If that mask is left on there, it's stainless steel or plated steel of some sort, and the paint comes off it very neatly if you put it in the ultrasonic cleaner. But then of course you've got to paint the thing again. A single screw at the back here holds this mask in place, and that mask in turn holds the rear glass in place. Leave that screw alone. If you shift that, you're moving the position of a tiny lens in here, and then you have a hell of a job getting your rangefinder to align correctly afterwards. I'm going to clean this in an ultrasonic cleaner. First of all, I'm going to clean that greasy mark off the end there, because I don't want grease of that nature floating around in the water to potentially settle on the glass surfaces I'm just busily trying to clean. There's a semi-silvered mirror, well there's a semi-silvered mirror here. This surface we can see here points to the front. That's glass. You can clean that with a cotton bud. The surface on the other side, that's probably got a coating on it. Don't do that. I clean it in an ultrasonic cleaner for good measure. And all I do is, got a small glass, I put in some hot water, a couple of drops of normal old dish soap, drop it in there, put the glass into the ultrasonic cleaner surrounded by water, give it a 3-minute burst. That's enough to clean the glass surfaces, both the semi-silvered mirror and the tiny lens that's hiding in there with that adjustment screw which I told you to leave alone. Someone's been at that screw, I can tell by the look of it. But leave that alone and all will go well. When it comes out of the ultrasonic cleaner, you've got to rinse it under a hot tap, then blow all the moisture out as much as you possibly can, and then dry it with a hairdryer. Blowing while you do it is a good method. You don't want droplets drying on any of those glass surfaces, otherwise they'll leave coffee rings. They'll be obvious. You won't like it. Right, I'll be back shortly.